Running on caffeine?
No.
No?
I don't really drink caffeine. Coffee or... once a week. Gotta treat yourself.
No, cream soda for me.
You like cream soda? You ever had Kutztown cream soda?
No.
I think that's the best cream soda. The Reading soda company's pretty good too. Oh, I haven't even turned it on.
Cheers.
That's right. If anybody wants to look at these are the Diapason magazines that we have. The ones we have available that A. Thompson Allen wrote the article in. So another magazine. See, is that the Diapason?
I've seen it.
Okay.
Yeah. Suppose we have two, so it is a diapason
Yeah.
rather than a monopason.
Then what?
A monopason.
I used to wear one of these. I don't know how fast I used to. Your pain. Like it kind of digs in the back of your ear. I'm not complaining. No complaint. What? It's not yet. How about now? Check 1, 2. Great. Well, good morning again. Thanks for being here. I wanted to take an opportunity to talk about our instruments. We are beyond blessed here at Derry. And really, both of these instruments were kind of I like to say they were a God thing, because this piano just happened to be in the showroom, and it was the best instrument that Jacobs had available. The organ was in a church that was closing, and just happens to be one of the finest voice Skinner organs I've ever set hands on. So I wanted to take an opportunity to talk to you about our instruments so that you could see them up close. This is a 2019 Steinway, and it was made in New York City, took about a year and a half to make. And so plans for this piano probably began in 2017, and this piano was finished right around 2019, used on stage with the Philly Symphony, and Yo-Yo Ma and Emanuel Ax recorded the Beethoven cello sonatas on this instrument for their latest CD. And Emanuel Ax signed the piano. He loved it so much. It's kind of a heritage amongst pianists. If you really like a piano and you're notable, you sign it. And usually you're asked to sign it. And if you don't like the piano, you can always say no. But usually the artist will say, I love this instrument so much. I'll say, well, would you mind putting your signature on there? It's also signed by Yuja Wang, who's an internationally known classical pianist. And when we had the dedication on February 12th, Ruth Slanchenska, who's the last living student of Rachmaninoff, signed the piano for us. And we needed an instrument that would fill this space. And we also needed a versatile instrument, because we go from Debussy on Sunday morning and classical hymn arrangements to Billy Joel, to Elton John, to gospel, to jazz. And the thing I love about this piano is the dynamic range. So you can go from fortissimo to pianissimo. To a whisper. And that's what you get with a Steinway that you don't get with a lot of other pianos. And there are a lot of great piano makers out there. And one of my favorites is the new Mason and Hamlin concert grands. And they're incredible. They're handmade just like Steinways here in the United States, but they don't have the dynamic range of a Steinway, in my opinion. And there's something that pianists like to say is, a good piano will bark at you. Have you ever heard that? Have you ever heard a pianist say that? Here's what I mean by barking at you. I'll play just a little excerpt of Rachmaninoff, and when I hit low C sharp at the bottom, you'll hear it get this brassy, bright sound while still having that fundamental. And some cheaper pianos, you'll get that bright, brassy sound, but you lose the fundamental. Or you don't get that bright, brassy sound, but you have the fundamental. Does that make sense? So when you play a note on a piano, I'll explain this really quickly. If I have this C right here, and I play this C, within that C, very quietly, are all these what we call harmonics. You'll hear this C, this G, this fourth, a third, a minor third, another minor third, a second, and they go up. And every pitch has all of these little tiny tones at play. So I can do one exercise so you can hear the octave. Do you hear it? I'll do it one more time. That's the note you're listening for. I'll do it one more time. So you'll hear this in just a little Rachmaninoff. Did you hear that? How it's got a little ping to it. And that's all those bright harmonics. Now the trick to a really, really good instrument is you can play pianissimo and you still got all those harmonics. None of them are lost. So if I play the very last couple measures, you'll still hear all of those upper harmonics. We could sit here all day, you know. It'll just keep ringing. A good piano will be so resonant that it rings. You may see on some instruments, they have little lights that flicker here on some pianos or over on the side, and it'll say that the piano needs to be watered just like your flower bed. I used to water the piano in Newville, and I made the mistake of watering it one Sunday morning, and a lady came up, she said, "You're putting water in the piano, oh my goodness." I said, "No worries, there's a tank to hold it. It's to keep it regulated." So the great thing about new Steinways, they will actually void the warranty if you put what's called a damp chaser system on it that holds water and has heating rods underneath. Because the new Steinways, they seal their boards so well. And since ours is a 2019, we don't need a damp chaser system. And this room ranges from in the mid-80s down into 68, 67. And this piano maintains its tuning. It's such a fine instrument. The other thing that I love is the clarity of tone. And I'm keeping this here so I can watch the time, otherwise we'll be here till noon. So when you play Mozart on a good piano, you want everything to be clear. The left hand has to be clear and not muddy, and you want the melody to come out. So this is Mozart's Rondo. I'll just play a little snippet of it for you. So do you hear how every little, it's just crystal clear. And this piano is such a refined instrument that it makes you it makes you have to be a better musician, because you can't fake anything on here. I mean, sometimes I get away with it. I run out of fingers or something and I do a little jump. But it makes you have to be so conscientious of your fingering. And a good piano should do that, because you have such a crisp, clean sound, even if you're doing jazz. You have to be so precise with everything. It's wonderful to play. The other thing is it's so responsive. If you just, any little thing you do. So when you're playing for worship and you're leading hymns and you want something to bloom, today we're going to do it as well with the organ, but if you're doing it as well with the piano. Fortissimo down to pianissimo, and everywhere in between there's a different dynamic every second. So you've got all those overtones going, you've got that dynamic range. Since you have a string that's nearly 8 feet long, this low A, that string is nearly 8 feet long. And on shorter pianos, it's a steel core wound by copper. On a shorter piano, to get a fuller sound, you have to double the winding. When you double the winding, you lose all of those harmonics. With these long strings, you have the depth and that fundamental that I was talking about. You have it the whole way up the piano, and the nice thing is you have a little extra length up here. So it sings all the way up to high C. The thing we really loved as a committee with this piano, and Dick, you can attest to this, is everybody that sat down couldn't get over how clear it is down in the tenor range. This part of the piano is often lost because you go from 3 strings per hammer. That's 3 strings. To 2. 3, 2. And so when you go from 3 to 2, often when you get to 2 strings that are copper wound from just 3 steel strings, you lose that depth of tone. Not on a 9-foot Steinway, you don't. And so on this, clarity. I can do it on pianissimo. It's just an amazing instrument. It's inspiring to play. And Mary Lemons, Mary Stryker. I can't wait for Karen Kleck to be back. She's in the area, so she's going to play. Karen, if you're watching at some point, can't wait for you to see this. And so I just wanted to give you a demonstration of the piano. Do you have any questions before we move to the Skinner? Yes, Marley.
This is Piano 101. What do the center and left pedals do?
So the right pedal, the sustain. The left pedal, if you watch the keyboard, it moves. And this is called the soft pedal. and the damper pedal, or the soft pedal. And so when you push this pedal down, all the hammers move to the right. So where there are 3 strings, the hammer will come up underneath those 3 strings. You push it to the right, only 2 strings are being hit or struck. That's with the soft pedal. This is without it. Does that make sense?
Here, yeah.
And so, when you have the top of a hammer, and you're welcome to come up later and look, the top of the hammer, it will get grooved out from where it strikes the strings. And then when you push this pedal, you get to relatively virgin felt, so it's nice and soft, and it actually gives the piano a different timbre, a darker sound, as opposed to the difference. Then the middle pedal is a neat pedal, and especially if you're doing things like Ravel, some of the Debussy sketches use the middle pedal. And what that is you can hold down a chord, it'll sustain it. The only notes that will sustain were the notes that you held down and played the pedal. Now you must hold the chord, play the pedal. You can't play the pedal, hold the chord. Otherwise it doesn't work. I can do that all day. But if I do, make sense? So if you're trying to play a piece that's got fast notes, I don't have an example in my mind, but let's say I want to do a hymn arrangement or something. You go. That makes sense? You can do other things around that sustain note. Then the right pedal is a sustain pedal. It'll just hold the notes forever and ever. I sat here one day just to see how long this piano will sustain. It was still going at 45 seconds, which is an exceedingly long time. Have you tried to hold your breath for 45 seconds? It's a very long time. And so it's a testament to the resonance of the instrument. And on top of that, you can voice piano. So you can take little needles, little titanium needles, and you can pluck the felt of the hammers. Jim Hess gets very irritated with me because I like to pound on my piano at home. And then every time he comes to tune, I say, Jim, it's so bright, I need you to voice it down. I go, oh, Dan, stop pounding on this piano. But, that just happens. The more you play an instrument, the hammer, the felt starts to compact. And you've just got to constantly do regulation and voicing the hammers and with a needle and just plucking the felt. I don't know if I've forgotten anything. I will tell you, each key within the action part has over 100 movable parts from the time you press that key to the time the hammer strikes the string. And this piano has over 7,000 parts. Yeah. And when you think about it, that leg probably has about 10 different parts. From each wheel, the caster, the big bolt that goes up through the leg itself, 2 bolts that hold it in. There's another metal piece that you turn the leg and it locks in, so when you're pushing the piano and one of those bolts comes loose, the piano doesn't go flying off on its side. So it's 7,000 parts. There's over 50,000 pounds of tension from this end of this steel plate that holds all these strings to that end. And you say, why does it not implode? Well, there's a lot of steel there. This piano weighs almost as much as your automobile. Yeah, this piano weighs a lot of poundage. Not quite a ton, but it's a lot. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, Marley.
Well, just to follow up, do composers score for pedal use, or does that
do.
up to the performer?
They do, yeah. Yeah, usually you'll see a note that's got a big tie over it to the next note. That's kind of saying you've got to sustain this while everything else is going on. And most of the time, it'll not have a pedal marking, but you just know that that's what you have to do. Some scores, additions, especially Schirmer, will do that. They'll put the little, whatever that thing is called. In music, it has a different look than the one on your computer keyboard, but it looks similar. It looks like the Hershey Park sign, and it says pedal in cursive. And then you kind of know that those notes need to hold through. So that's our piano. I wanted to do 20 minutes, and I did 32, I did about 20. It's 9:32. Let's go to the organ. There are 2 diapason magazines around. So our organ has an interesting history. This instrument is from the Aeolian-Skinner organ company. And Ernest M. Skinner was one of the prolific organ builders in the early 20th century. And he is the man who basically took the orchestra and put it into an organ. He developed a French horn. If you go to Pine Street Presbyterian Church, they have a 1926 E.M. Skinner, and they still have Ernest M. Skinner's French horn in that organ. Don Clapper, when he was restoring the organ, he actually had friends come in with pipe trays, take the French horn out, and he hid it in his office. Have you heard about this? He hid the French horn in his office so that nobody from the Moeller Organ Company would touch Ernest Skinner's French horn, which was voiced by Ernest Skinner in the factory in Boston, Massachusetts. So Ernest Skinner was not a great financial, shall we say, business owner, and he found hard times before the Depression and merged with the Aeolian Organ Company. The largest Aeolian organ on the East Coast is Longwood Gardens, if you've ever been in there to see that organ. And so we have an Aeolian-Skinner at the Hershey Theater from 1929. And this is a 1950 Aeolian-Skinner. The contract was signed in February of 1950, and the organ was finished in 1951. This organ has an interesting history because the choir master at Church of the Redeemer, where this organ resided previously, was a rather picky individual and wanted some idiosyncratic things done with the organ, like certain couplers and things, and actually wanted one flute from the swell borrowed throughout the instrument rather than individual flutes, kind of save money, that sort of thing. And G. Donald Harrison, the president of the company, was so frustrated, he handed the organ contract over to Aubrey Thompson Allen, who worked at the Skinner Company. And Aubrey went through and worked with this organist choir master and developed a very fine instrument. When it was originally installed in 1951, it was 42 ranks. It has been added to a little bit. There's a concert flute on there, there's a harmonic flute that has been added. So they filled out the flutes that were missing. And some are new pipes, some are reused older pipes that have been refurbished. And so now we have 45 ranks of pipes, 2,795 pipes in this instrument. And this is just a refined, I'm going to put the bench up before I play. Somebody else was using it. 7, 8, 9, 10, that should do it. This is a refined sound. So how does this work? Down in the basement, there is a closet that they store stuff for the, you know what I'm talking about, that closet down there. They store school supplies and stuff for the Sunday school. In the back is a blower room with a very large pneumatic blower. And it blows air into a reservoir, which comes up a big chimney pipe, is what it kind of looks like, a metal chimney pipe. And that air comes up into several reservoirs that are up here. The floor of the organ is pretty much at the top of these, right where the cross is, the top of that panel is pretty much the floor of the organ chamber. And it goes clear over into this wall, clear over to that wall. And essentially, there are 3 big rooms of pipes. In the middle is the main chamber of pipes. This is called the great organ. Within there are all the big pipes for the pedal division. Then, to the left of that is the swell organ. I'll show you why it's called the swell organ. It swells up, gets louder and softer. And then to the far right is the choir organ. And this has our new concert flute. And it sounds like an acoustic flute, like somebody would play. Isn't that lovely? We can add the little vibrato if we want. Called a tremulant on the organ. But the full choir is not a big sound. It's a really lovely sound. Yeah. And historically, can you imagine what the choir organ accompanied? The choir, yeah. And they were usually pipes that were very much like what's in the swell or in the grate. They were softer in their voicing. And they were expressive, so they had swell shades over them. So there's a room of pipes up there with these what look like Roman shades, and they kind of open up in a chronological order from the back to the front so that the organ can get louder and softer. And the swell is the same way. The grate is not expressive. And in fact, these keys aren't expressive like a piano. I could pound all day, or I could play without any real heavy touch. I'm going to break it, but so the pipes have to be in a room to be expressive. And the grate, the pedal, and there's a division called the positive, which I'll talk about that in a minute. That has more Baroque sounds, time of Bach, Baroque. I'm not going to make a joke about it, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it, you know? And so this is the positive. And actually, when you think of a positive organ, if you've ever watched Handel's Messiah and there's a little organ sitting in the orchestra, that's called a positive organ. And it sounds just like this. There's a little mixture to top it off. How does this work? So these are called stops. When you pull them out, they turn on the pipes. When you push them in, they stop the sound and turn off the pipes. There are 4 groups of organ pipes. There's the ones that sound just like an organ. They're called diapasons. They're not mimicking anything else. And they speak at middle C, the octave above, the octave above that, an octave lower, and even on pitches that aren't a C. I'll get into that in a minute. And then really high pitches. So do you remember when I mentioned on the piano, each note has harmonics? Organs work very much in a harmonic sense. So where I played this C, or I played this C, and you heard the C sound, well, I can turn that C on. And then I mentioned there's a G above that. There it is. And there's another C above that. And there's another C and a G above that. And so we're adding octaves and harmonics. And that's what makes full organ sound so majestic. Because you're hearing all of these notes. And just like the piano with organ pipes, each note has all these harmonics in it. So, when we sang with Bob Lau, or Dr. Lau, at Mount Gretna, in the rehearsal, he was talking about, as a choir, you hear all these harmonics within the choir, and there's this Pythagorean theorem where basically your brain is trying to comprehend all of these little notes that you don't know are there but are there. And that's why when you hear all these parts going, it wants to get bogged down and get slow. And so as an organist, when we lead hymns, I can't listen to you. I have to just keep that pulse going, because you're hearing so many harmonics, plus all these tubby bass notes that rattle the church. And so I have to play a little more detached than I would on the piano so that you can hear that space and know, oh, we've got to keep moving. If I played hymns like this, now because our sanctuary has really clear acoustics and our organ speaks clearly, you would be fine. And you all sing so well, so that helps. But if I were to play hymns like that with no articulation, it would just slow down more and more and more and more. So that's the job of the organist. So, we have all of these stops. Each stop tells you what type of voice is associated with that stop. Then there's numbers. I'll get to the numbers in a minute. We talked about the diapason. And they speak at all these pitches. I mentioned the flute earlier. Here's the flute. Here's another flute. And here's another flute. This is the original flute that caused so much controversy. And there's another flute here. So you've got all these flutes, and that's the flute family. And they speak at all the various pitches, just as the diapasons do. And there's more fractions. Now, with the fractions, you don't want to play chords because you've got too many wonky notes going on, and distance gets to be irritating. I'll talk about that in a minute. I've got a couple things. I want to get to the numbers later. So then there's strings, and these kind of sound like a symphony orchestra in a way. And we can add all of the upper pitches, just like we did on the flutes. So those are just strings. Then we have the fun part of the organ that has what we like to call the party horns. These are the reeds. They mimic reeds like you hear in the orchestra. Trumpet. Yeah? And we have a soft trumpet and we have a louder trumpet. And then there's a clarion, which is essentially a bugle. And there are other reeds that mimic orchestral instruments, like the oboe. Beautiful oboe. This organ has a bass clarinet, which you never see on organs in nowadays, not often. That is a... So that's the clarinet. There's an English horn down here. That's the English horn. We can add a tremulant or vibrato. And then there's a stop that only really pertains to the organ. It's called the vox humana. Any guesses what the vox humana is?
Something voice.
Human voice. Now, I'll tell you, this is not a very pretty human voice. I think somebody's up there shaking them in the chamber. It has several uses. I can take away the shaking, the vibrato, and I can add a little flute with it, and we've got the Renaissance. So there you go, you have a little buzzy reed. And you can also add it with strings. So full strings with the vox humana is a lovely, lovely sound on this organ. This is without. This is with. Gives you an idea. Isn't that very pretty? Yeah, it's a really nice addition to the strings. So, we've got strings, flutes, reeds, diapasons. We've got the four families of organ voices. Now we've got all the numbers. This is the fun part. So if you see a number, let's take the 8-foot diapason. The number stands for the length of the pipe on the bottom C of that stop. So that's the lowest pipe in that rank, and it's 8 feet tall. This pipe would be 4 feet tall. This pipe would be 2 feet tall. And we get a 1 foot. The pipe that's speaking there would be the size of about a number 2 pencil. Now that's the bottom of that rank. So when you get that high, that pipe is about, a dime, the height of a dime, really tiny. The tiniest pipe in this organ is about 1 centimeter tall. That's that one. That's the tiniest pipe of the organ. The largest pipe in this instrument is 16 feet long, and that would be the contrabass. And there are several pipes in this instrument that are 6 feet long. The Aeolian-Skinner is also 16 feet long. Some of them will say 16 feet, but they're lying. They're actually 8 feet with a little wooden cap in the top of them. So when you put the cap in the top of the pipe, the sound waves double back, and it makes the pitch an octave lower. So this is a bourdon. That is 8 feet, but speaks at 16. So is the roordel. Now, you can play a G, and if you do it just at the right stop, you get what they call a 32-foot pitch. So it's 8, 16, 32. And because of the harmonics lining up, the waves lining up, it sounds like it's much lower than it is. It's a little deceiving, but it's quite genius when you want to add that rumble in the church. And you don't have a 32-foot tall ceiling to put these huge pipes. So you've got 8 foot, the octave above, which would be a 4, octave above that a 2, and I mentioned these fractions. So this is a C, we know that. I'll play this C. What about this? That's not a C. That's actually 2.5 octaves above. It's a G, right? So, you got that note? And there's also a 5 and a third that could be in there. We have one on the pedal. So if I play this C, right, and then a 10 and 2/3, there's also a fundamental playing with it. But there's a G in there, then a C above, and then a 5 and a third, and a C above that. That make sense? So you've got all these fractions. There are other fractions that speak at 1 3/5, 1 1/3. They are just like the 2 2/3. They play a G or an E. So, for example, here's a C, There's a third. Actually, it's a little flat, but there's a third in there. Here's another G, and then you got your high C that would go in there, but there's also some notes added. So there's all of this math going on, but you just know after a while that a lyra goes 2.5 or 3.5 octaves with a G above, and there's a terz, which is 2.5 octaves with a third above. You just kind of learn over time all the names and the numbers. Some of the names are French. There's a montre, which is a French diapason. It's a little thinner. And there's an English diapason, which is a little fatter. Different characteristics. You can use them together. There are also some solar reeds on this organ. This is the bombard. This is also the same set of pipes from the pedals. So actually this bombard is borrowed up from the pedal. You can add these organs together with this row. These are called couplers, and they take sounds from this keyboard and they put them down on this keyboard. So you can move sounds all around, and you can have different sounds on different keyboards. You've probably noticed this thing that I'm playing with my feet. This is just a giant keyboard, just like up here. It's a identical image, just larger. So while you're playing, you add the fundamental, the bass with the pedals. The wonderful thing about this organ, and I'll play some rep for you, is it can play everything from French music to Bach to hymns to English cathedral music to symphonic music. So I'll play a couple pieces for you so you get a flavor of it. I'm going to use the positive division and all these fractions that I talked about. And this is called a cornet. On the organ, a cornet is spelled like cornet, C-O-R-N-E-T, and it is an 8-foot pitch. 4, 2 and 2/3, 2 foot, and 1 1/3. And you can add the 1 3/5 for that third in there. And we have a lovely harmonic flute. Add the fifth with it. And this is Bach's Ich ruf zu dir, Herr Jesu Christ, I call to thee, Lord Jesus Christ. And it'll use the cornet and the 8 2 2/3. Pretty. I love that cornet on here. It's just beautiful. So there is something called a plenum on the organ. Plenum is 8, pace an 8, the 4 foot, the 2 foot, and this mixture. Mixtures, they have Roman numerals, and there are 3 or 4 ranks of pipes that just kind of top off the rank. They add the brilliance to the organ. While we're at it, let's add this mixture too with the positif. Add our 8 and 4s in the choir, and we will add our plenum in the swell with mixture, and pedal to match. This is Wer nur den lieben Gott lass walten. If thou but suffer God to guide thee. This is a chorale prelude, and Bach would write these for his organ students, for organists, to play them before the church service. And they would be a wonderful tool for teaching the congregation the hymn tune. You know this hymn. Does that sound familiar? Yeah? So this is the chorale prelude, Wer nur der lieben Gott lass walten. And this is I Call to Thee, Lord Jesus Christ. You'll hear the hymn tune in my right hand. And you'll hear kind of the moving of notes or the Holy Spirit or whatever Bach was thinking at the time. If you look at the text, you kind of get believe in the pedal. Believe, believe, believe. If you can use your imagination a little bit with Bach. So this is BWV 642. Yeah, if thou but suffer God to guide thee. Just gotta check our time. Good, 9:59. I'm about done. I have one last piece to play for you. And I talked about the strings, the flutes, the diapasons, the reeds. And this piece starts on soft strings, builds to full strings, and builds to full organ, and back down to soft strings at the very end. This is Elgar's Nimrod. I'm going to shut this off. French horn from Pine Street? It's back in the organ. That was the first thing Don Clapper saw to get back in the Pine Street organ, was the French horn. Yeah. And it sounds really convincing. We do not have a Skinner French horn on this instrument, but we have a lot of beautiful voices. And the great thing about a truly refined organ, and the wonderful thing about Aeolian-Skinner is the symphonic sound. These strings on this organ are ethereal. They just lift your soul. Sometimes I sit in here at 10 o'clock at night and I record it and I play and I go sit in the pew. And that's my prayer time, just to listen to this organ and pray. So we have a pretty close relationship. But you notice how when you build up the organ, it's so gradual. I mean, it builds beautifully, full, but you can really, there's no jarring sounds that come on. It's because everything's voiced so beautifully, it tapers. That's the sign of a very good pipe organ. And it's clear, crisp and clean. Yes, Marley?
Now, does the organ actually have fewer, the same, or more parts than the piano? You know?
Many, many more.
More.
Many more. Yeah, I don't even know how many parts this, hundreds of thousands of pieces. Every note, just to play this note, there is a ton of wiring that goes up through. Just from the stop to the key to a computer board to the pallet underneath the pipe that comes down and lets the air in, and to the slider that opens up, the electricity that opens up the slide that lets air into that box that those pipes sit on and holds air. It's so many moving parts. 7,000, a couple 100,000. Yeah.
Do you find it sometimes more satisfying to play the piano because you're in charge of the loudness?
I love them both.
Okay.
They're two different animals, but I love them both. Yeah.
I'm sitting here and I'm so appreciative that somehow God brought you with all your brilliance and to be admired, but to be so respected. Because that is not a simple instrument to play. And you do with such really brilliant ability. And I would like to kind of play off on his question. If I could have the power to chain you to one instrument, would you choose? Oh, the organ, really?
Depends on the organ.
Okay. Oh, that's true.
Oh, that's a hard decision to make.
But there's more versatility.
There's more versatility here.
And you are versatile.
Yes, Claire.
Why are trumpets considered reeds on an organ?
Oh, I should have brought the pipes out. So, before I forget, I'll answer that in just a second. After the service, you're welcome to go with me up into the chamber. There's no ladders or anything, just steps and a couple doorways you got to step over, and you're welcome to see the pipes. So reeds on the organ, at least on this organ, at the foot of the pipe is a reed. It's a, have you ever seen like an accordion reed? It's a piece of metal that they've cut a square U out of, and the air goes through it, and that reed is like a little tongue that vibrates. It's a great question.
Okay, so it's how it makes sound on the organ, not because the trumpet obviously is not a reed.
Right. Yeah, it has essentially a metal reed inside of it. Yeah, and if you get a stink bug down in there, forget it. The reed's not going anywhere. Then you get your dollar bill out and you get the stink bug out and you clean the reed out with the dollar bill. $100 bill works a little better. I think that's a mindset. Yes, Gary.
How old were you when you started to play?
I started playing by getting in trouble. I snuck up to my church's organ at like 6 years old, was playing Trust and Obey, and my teacher heard me as she was leaving the church. You have no right to touch that organ. And my mother just said, then why don't you teach it? So, yeah.
Have they ever done anything like a hybrid of a pipe organ and electronic organ?
They do, yeah, all the time. We do not have a hybrid. This is all pipe.
Okay.
Especially for the 32s, for churches that don't have room for 32-foot pipes, they can put in a huge set of subwoofers, and they have digitally sampled organ pipes by the Walker Organ Company. Allen Organ does that too, Rogers, but Walker's the best. And a lot of churches will do that if they don't have the financial wherewithal or the room for those huge pipes. Yes, another question.
Does the organ in the theater have like the choir section? Because presumably it's rarely going to play with a
You
choir.
do have a choir. And they've got a fanfare, a bombard division with big reeds. There's a trumpet military that's brass, that looks like flared brass trumpets. And they have real 32s at the theater. And the top of the wooden bombard is about this big. And from the base of the pipe, the resonator is 32 feet. Plus you've got all that reed space and what they call the shallot, which is what the reed sits in. It's about a 35, 36 foot tall pipe. And when you're in the theater, it's on the right. So if you're ever hearing the organ in the Hershey Theater, you go, and you feel it in your soul, that's coming from the 32 right inside that green grill on the right-hand side of the theater. Yes? No?
Okay, last one.
Sure.
I think you should do classes, demos like this with the choir, demonstrating choir stuff, and with hymns.
I think we could do that. It's a great idea. Yeah. Then it would teach the church, this is what all we work towards. This is how much work we put into one bloody note. Yeah. And handles as well. That's a great idea. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, real quick, sitting here, it made me think of the old expression, pulling out all the stops. And I would imagine that's an organ thing because it means going at something full force.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly where that phrase comes from. That's right. Yeah.
What would happen if you pulled out all the stops at one time?
You would get tremulance going, ooh, and you would get the chimes. I didn't show you the chimes. There's a set of 1915 chimes on this organ. And you don't get chimes that nice anymore because the alloys in the metal are very expensive to make chimes that nice.
Organs are centuries older than pianos.
Yes,
okay?
2,000 years old. Organs originated in the Olympic Games in Athens. And they were essentially a call to competition. And then there was something called a hydraulics, which ran on water. We could talk all day. I think we're running out of time. But if you have any questions after worship, I'll be right up here. Just come on up, and if you want to see the chamber, I'll take you up. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.